I've been checking out the best tips for saving money if you want to create a beautiful border. But of course, in order to work out whether those tips will work for you, you need to know the pros and cons of those tips and how much you could actually save. So that's what this video is going to tell you. It's Alexandra here from the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel and blog, and I'm revamping my border completely. You may be starting from scratch, maybe putting a border where there hasn't been one before, or completely changing a current border. Obviously, you may be working in a different currency from what I am, and plants may be more expensive or cheaper where you are. But just knowing what the costs are on one border shows you how much proportionately you could save with some of these tips. I researched how much perhaps a landscaper might charge to fill an entire border, and I also looked at the cost of plants online and in a nursery and measured out a square metre of my own garden. And it is difficult to do an estimate, but I'm estimating around £50 per square metre. My border is 10 metres by 3, so that's 30 square metres, and that would mean completely restocking it from scratch would cost £1,500, which is a significant investment. The first tip that any garden designer will give you about saving money in the garden is to make a shopping list before you leave the house. If you just walk into a garden centre or nursery and put the plants that seem most attractive into your basket, you'll finish up buying lots of things that look good at one particular time of year and leave you with gaps at the rest of the year. It's also very easy to overbuy, but this tip is about not having wastage. There are also quite a lot of factors in choosing the right plant for the right place, which is why I wrote them down on a sort of grid format on a list. The factors include whether the plants need a sunny or a shady spot, their height, their spread, their flower colour, when they flower, their foliage interest, whether they're useful for wildlife, and any other factor that's important to you. So I put this on a grid list, and in fact you can download this. It's from my website for free. It's called the Beautiful Borders Checklist, but you could also do it yourself on Excel. And it took me several hours to actually really research what plants I wanted and fill out the list and everything like that. And then I went to the Great Dixter Plant Fair because it has lots of lovely independent nurseries to buy the plants. And of course, I forgot the list. But what I found out was that having done the work on the list, I was very much more focused when I actually came to choosing the plants. People often ask if it's cheaper to get plants from local nurseries and local growers than it is to go to garden centres. And I don't think it is cheaper. I haven't particularly seen that it's cheaper. However, it can mean less wastage. If you buy a plant from someone who's grown it locally, it will be used to your conditions and your soil. And additionally, you'll be able to talk to the grower and ask their advice, and that's absolutely invaluable. So if you want successful plants, I think buying from local independent growers is a really good idea. When I got home from Great Dixter with my haul, I actually did the list again with the heights and the spread and the flowering colour and the foliage colour and everything, because it was hugely helpful when I planted it out. The second tip, which you'll see quoted quite widely, is also about keeping the long-term costs of your border down rather than saving on the initial cost, and that is to choose perennials or shrubs instead of annuals. Annuals are plants that grow from seed, flower and die in 1 year, and they have been the mainstay of colour in garden borders for a long time, and they provide wonderful colour. However, if you have to buy flowers and plants every year, those costs are going to add up over the years. Perennials are plants which stay in your ground for 3 years or more, and shrubs are plants which stay in the ground for 3 years or more and have a woody structure to them. And of course, even though perennials and shrubs are not cheaper than annuals, in fact they may be slightly more expensive, they nevertheless stay in your garden for years on end, and they reduce the long-term maintenance. The third tip, however, really will take some money off that £1,500, and that is reuse some of your old plants. Of course, if you're starting a border from scratch, you may not be able to do that. But if you're completely renovating a border, you will actually have to dig up as many of the plants as you can. Garden designers made it absolutely clear to me that I really needed to clear the border as much as possible, because otherwise I would just be planting around the old border design and making compromises about where plants needed to go. However, some of the plants I dug up, I put in pots, and I'll be replanting them in the border in different places. And there are also a core of plants and trees that I didn't want to dig up and I definitely wanted to keep. And apart from the trees, those were the roses and the irises. So adding together the plants that I've kept in the border and actually kept in pots to replant in the border, that's about 10% of the border. So that would save me £150. Our back borders also need replanting, and some of the plants I've dug out of the main border are simply going into the back border because there isn't a budget for renovating the back border. When you buy your plants can really save you money. At the end of the summer, in the autumn, you'll see discounts of up to 40%. Plants are not looking at their most attractive at that time of year, and people aren't thinking about their gardens. But autumn is a really good time to plant perennials and shrubs, and many gardeners are now tending to plant in autumn rather than in spring. I saw discounts of at least 40% when I was shopping for plants in the autumn, and I filled about a third of my border with these plants. There is a slight problem in the sense that you do have to buy plants that will be happy in the soil in their first winter. Many plants which would be hardy once established may be a bit more vulnerable if you get very bad weather in their first winter. And for example, salvias are one of these. I interviewed the UK's leading salvia expert, William Dyson, on growing salvias, and I'll put that video in the description below. And he said that salvias really should be planted in spring. So I bought a couple of salvias and I kept them in my potting shed over winter, and they're looking very healthy. So looking at what I saved by buying plants in the autumn rather than the spring, I reckon that's about a third of the border, and that's 40% off. So I reckon that saved me £180. The next money-saving tip is one that can really cut the cost of your borders, although I haven't used it as much as I could have done, and that's propagating plants. I'll put a video about propagating plants in the description below, but at its simplest, it's cutting a little bit off plants, sticking them into potting compost, letting the roots grow and growing another plant. Propagating isn't difficult, but you can have losses, so you would need to propagate more plants than you need. And of course, if you're going to have a border which has, say, 180 plants in it or 200 plants in it like mine, you'd have to propagate about 240 plants to get a completely free border. The other thing is, of course, you would have to rely on having friends who've got plants that you want. You always have to ask people before you snip a bit off for propagating. Some people have sort of traditionally sneaked a little bit of a cutting into their bag, but this is frowned upon because in gardens which have lots of visitors, if there are one or two very special plants and even a small percentage take cuttings from those plants, then it can really affect the shape of the plant, how it's pruned and its flowering. I reckon that most home gardeners could probably take 12 to 15 cuttings. And the thing is, of course, you have to take them the year before you're going to plant them because they need to grow on before you can plant them in the soil. But if you're planning to have a new border next year, you could propagate this year, and I reckon even with just 12 to 15 plants, you could save £90. The other tip that can really save you lots of money is growing from seed. You can grow lots of plants from seeds, and if they're not annuals, you will have to say grow them from seed this year and then bring them on for a couple of years before they're ready to plant in the ground. But if you grow your annuals from seed, you can really save money. A packet of cosmos will likely to be about £5 or less, and you can usually grow about 30 plants from that. But if you buy cosmos as seedlings or plantlets, you'd probably pay at least £1 for them. So that's a very good saving. And if you're revamping your border from scratch, you will have gaps in the first year, and annuals will fill those gaps beautifully. I reckon I've saved about £25 from growing from seed, and you could certainly save more. The next tip is one where I have actually saved a lot, but it isn't right for everybody, and that is self-seeding plants. I've got over 25 self-seeding plants in this garden, and they've been here for quite a long time. So it's been easy for me to go around the garden and pick up things like self-seeded Lychnis coronaria or red campion, which has grown in the path, and I will dig up 5 or 6 plants and then plant a little group of them in the new border. But if you are a really keen weeder and you like to keep your garden neat and tidy, it will be harder for you to have self-seeded plants. Self-seeded plants and weeds look very much the same when they emerge, so you have to actually let them get to a certain size before you can tell whether they're plants you want. And not everyone's happy to do that. And of course, if your garden is completely empty and you're starting from scratch, you won't have any self-seeders anyway. However, looking at the self-seeded plants planted in my re-vamp border, I reckon I have saved about £125. Another very good tip, which we can all enjoy, is buy smaller plants. A plant in a 9cm pot and a plant in a 2-litre pot will grow to the same size eventually. Obviously, the smaller plant will take longer, but it costs about half. You don't always get the opportunity to choose between the 9cm pots and the 2-litre pots. However, I have bought most of my plants in 9cm pots, and I reckon I've saved about £225 as a result. They are very tiny plants, and so I've got lots of little plants in the border with big gaps between them, and those gaps obviously will be there in the summer, and I'll maybe fill them with annuals. So it's not a perfect way of doing it, but it is a substantial saving, and ultimately those 9cm pots will actually create just as big plants as the 2-litre pots. If you add up all those savings, it's actually over half the cost of the £1,500. The remaining cost of my border is only £705. If you'd like to see how the border progresses, I'll be doing lots of videos on it over the year, so do tap subscribe, and thank you for watching. Goodbye.